On the backwater world of Ork, an Ork trooper caught a bolter shell to the face. The round shattered his skull and pulverized his brain. A pain boy stitched him back together by riveting a plate of adamantium directly onto his head. When the trooper woke up from the operation, he claimed he could hear voices, specifically the voices of Gork and Mork, the twin gods of the Ork species. He believed these voices were giving him a direct divine mandate to conquer the stars. His name was Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka. To understand the threat Ghazghkull posed, you have to understand the concept of a Waaagh. It is part biological migration, part holy war, and part mass hysteria. When a warlord grows powerful enough, billions of scattered greenskins abandon their infighting and unite under his banner, driven by a genetic compulsion to seek out the biggest fight possible. Ghazghkull's absolute certainty that he spoke for the gods drew orcs from across the sector. He took a localized, disorganized alien threat and refined it into a unified, targeted crusade. And the target he chose was Armageddon, one of the Imperium's most vital industrial worlds. The Ork Armada descended on the Armageddon system in a massive space hulk, a terrifying, mountain-sized amalgamation of derelict ships and scrap metal. It drifted through the void, effortlessly crushing the planet's outdated orbital satellites and defense craft. The man in charge of defending Armageddon was Planetary Governor Hermann von Strab. Despite clear warnings and astrological omens of the approaching horde, von Strab refused to ask the Imperium for Space Marine reinforcements. He was convinced his local planetary defense forces could handle the invasion on their own. They couldn't. When the orcs landed, building-sized war machines called gargants plowed through the thin human trench lines. Armored columns of orcs overran the northern continents in a matter of days, crushing the local regiments and enslaving the survivors to feed the orc war machine. Billions of human lives were lost in the opening weeks of the war. That slaughter was driven by the sheer violence of the orc invasion, but it was enabled by the pride and catastrophic ineptitude of Armageddon's governor. The planet was bleeding out, and the surviving defenders desperately needed someone who actually knew how to fight. Enter Commissar Sebastian Yarrick. He was an aging, heavily scarred officer who was literally scheduled to retire the day the orcs landed. Seeing the complete collapse of the global defense, Yarrick openly defied von Strab's orders and took direct command of the forces stationed at Hades Hive, a heavily polluted industrial city in the southern hemisphere. Yarrick knew his troops were terrified. He countered that panic with absolute iron discipline. He immediately organized the frightened civilian population and routed soldiers into labor gangs, digging a massive, multi-layered trench network around the city perimeter. This topographical map of the Armageddon continent shows exactly why Hades Hive mattered. You can see the wide green invasion arrows of the Ork horde advancing south, but right here, at the city, the terrain forces them into a severe bottleneck. The dense, vertically layered industrial architecture meant the orcs couldn't utilize their overwhelming numbers or massive siege engines effectively. Yarrick took full advantage of that layout. When Ghazghkull's elite infiltration units, the commandos, tried to drop into the city, Yarrick sent maintenance crews armed with bolt pistols and combat knives into the claustrophobic ventilation shafts. The human defenders systematically ambushed the larger aliens in the dark, narrow corridors, completely neutralizing the orc size advantage. Through sheer tactical brilliance, Yarrick turned a vulnerable, decaying manufacturing center into a lethal meat grinder. He took an irregular militia of hive-gangers and factory workers and forced them to hold the line against an army of monsters. Yarrick spoke the orc language and was one of the Imperium's leading experts on their psychology. He knew that the greenskins held a deep, superstitious terror of the evil eye, a belief that a harsh enough glare could literally kill. During a vicious firefight early in the siege, Yarrick lost his left eye. Rather than getting a standard prosthetic, he weaponized the alien superstition. He had a cybernetic pulse laser installed in the empty socket, allowing him to shoot his enemies with a glance. He made their myth real. This psychological warfare escalated during the final battle for the Hive. An enormous orc war boss named Ghazghkull breached the lines, engaging Yarrick in single combat. With a swing of his massive power claw, the alien severed Yarrick's right arm at the elbow. Fighting through the shock and blood loss, Yarrick swung his power sword and decapitated the Ork leader. What Yarrick did next cemented his legend. He picked up the dead war boss's power claw, brandished it at the retreating aliens, and later had the massive mechanical weapon physically bolted onto his own severed stump. Yarrick broke the morale of a species that thrives on violence by engineering his own legend. He survived the unrelenting siege by becoming a walking nightmare that the orcs whispered about in the dark. Word of this terrifying human spread quickly, and it infuriated Ghazghkull. His massive crusade was being stalled by a single, aging commissar. Driven by rage and personal pride, the Ork warlord abandoned his broader strategic objectives. This data map illustrates the turning point of the war. Ghazghkull diverted millions of troops and massive siege engines away from other critical battlefronts across the planet. He hyper-concentrated all of his available resources on one single point, Hades Hive. The resulting siege lasted for 6 brutal months. The hive was pounded to rubble. Yarrick and his defenders were pushed to the absolute brink, surviving on reduced power, rats, and roaches. But as the human defensive perimeter shrank, the orcs' supply lines flatlined. They exhausted their food and ammunition trying to break a bottleneck that refused to yield. By obsessing over Yarrick, Ghazghkull stalled the momentum of his own invasion. He sacrificed a global advantage to settle a personal vendetta against one stubborn old man. Those 6 months of localized resistance saved Armageddon. The delay gave the Imperium the time it needed to muster a relief force. Armored drop pods carrying the Blood Angels Space Marines streaked through the atmosphere, landing directly behind the exhausted Ork army and outflanking them entirely. Caught off guard, undersupplied, and overextended from the siege, Ghazghkull realized his position was untenable. The Ork prophet was forced to abandon the planet and retreat into the void. When the Space Marines finally pushed through to the ruins of Hades Hive, they found a city reduced to ash, but standing amidst a mountain of slain orcs was Commissar Yarrick. Ghazghkull had the numbers to seize the system, but he lost his momentum the moment he made the war personal. A single, aging human used the warlord's own pride to bait him into a strategic dead end, breaking the back of an invasion that had built